If we've never met before, my name is Robin Huling. I live in Utah. My husband drug me out here about 11 years ago. I came out here kicking and screaming, but then I fell in love. And I am a Florida girl by heart, but I have learned to miss the mountains. I took them for granted when I first moved here. I thought they were really pretty, but now I miss them when I travel apart. But I am from Florida, Orlando, Florida, and I live here in Utah now with my four children. We uh, have really fun times. My boys play football. My oldest daughter is an anime nerd. My youngest baby girl, is 8. She was a surprise 40th birthday present. And so I'm still trying to convince her that we can be besties for life, but I have not convinced her yet. When I lived in Orlando, I worked for Universal Studios, Disney World, and Margaritaville, and Planet Hollywood. And what's interesting now is I focus a lot on tech and startup world, which is so different than the hospitality industry, but it's really fun to see how those worlds collide. So I'm really excited for you guys to join me today. I'm so grateful for the multi-funding team, Ali and Ani, to invite me on these webinars. I really do enjoy them. And we're going to talk about conflict resolution today. If you joined me last time, we started out with effective communication. That is my specialty. I'm an effective communication conflict resolution consultant, and I work with teams and partners and trying to create high functioning teams built on the foundation of effective communication. Conflict resolution plays a key role in that. And we'll go ahead and get started. We're moving on because I really want you to understand that with ineffective communication, there is a cost. We think about it typically with delays and missed deadlines and lack of innovation, stress and anxiety, but it really does affect your bottom line. We need to talk about and focus again on the fact that the golden rule, which we harmoniously live with in our everyday life, is the challenge when it comes to your teams. Because we don't want to treat others the way that we like to be treated. We need to communicate and treat others the way that they best receive that communication. That way, we have effective collaboration. We release conflict and tension because we are being able to adjust and focus on others and really focus in on the way that they like to be communicated with, not the way that we like to receive communication. We're going to focus today, when we talk about conflict resolution and the problems with conflict resolution, we're going to talk about ineffective collaboration. This leads to not having innovation with your teams. When you have constructive confrontation, it is a tool for growth and innovation. You have better problem-solving skills, and when it's handled constructively, you have the ability for ideas to thrive and to be challenged. I sometimes work with teams that tell me that they don't have any conflict problems, that is not an issue for them. And when I hear about that, I also see that as a red flag, because if you don't have a safety foundation where people can question ideas or challenge the status quo, when that is not a foundation of being able to say your opinions at things, that is a red flag also. We want to be able to have effective conflict, because avoiding confrontation just leads to unsolved issues. It hinders your creativity and it slows down decision-making skills. So where do we start? You can't fix anybody else. So it all starts with self-awareness. And true self-awareness, true working on yourself, it really should be uncomfortable. If anybody has ever worked out before, I tend to joke that one of my next TED Talks is going to be how I lost 30 pounds in 30 years. It took me quite a long, and then, getting it back. But what was really interesting is when I first started on a healthy journey of physical activity, I wanted to do weightlifting and I didn't have any weights in my house. So I started with cans of, I think, baked beans because those were the biggest ones I had. But eventually, those baked beans turned into 1 pound weights that turned into 5 pound weights, that 10 pounds and 15. And anybody who's in the weightlifting or does any weightlifting knows for a fact that you have to break down the muscle for it to rebuild itself. So it is uncomfortable and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. And true self-awareness has to be uncomfortable. You have to be willing to take your blinders off and see your blind spots. You have to lean into the fact that you might have good intentions, but it's not coming across in a valid or good way. You want to be able to better understand your values and your priorities and goals. So if you really can put out there what your goals and strategies are, what your values are, and people understand them, people see your values, that means your behavior is the same as your intention. Understanding your own strengths. We all have amazing strengths, but all of us are human, which means those strengths that we are great at, that we enjoy, that people like about us, often come with some weaknesses and some blind spots. So it's really important that when we go through these exercises, when we listen to this webinar, that you take notes and kind of figure out where do you fall in these different categories and where are some pain points that you think, oh, maybe I didn't notice this. Maybe people do see me in a certain way that I might not see myself. Because once you start recognizing the challenges that you have, it's much easier to then navigate more effectively with other relationships. That's the real goal, is bringing out the best in others because you brought out the best in yourself. So let's talk about observable behaviors. Now, if you do know me or you were with my last webinar, you know my favorite tool of the trade is the DISC theory. So DISC theory by Dr. Marston is the foundation, the psychology that is all personality tests, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, Take Flight, any of those personality type tests are all based on the DISC theory established by Dr. Marston. And that theory states that we're all human and we all are born with natural behavior styles. Now, it can be argued, and it is, differences of nurture versus nature, society, what's expected of us, how we were raised, how our parents were, and all of those are true and they do influence our behaviors. But the study says that we all have natural behaviors, and two of the most common ones that we can identify is fast-paced and outspoken. Those are the type of people that you would say is outgoing. You typically would think they're extroverts, but when they walk into a room, they give off a lot of energy and everybody knows that they have arrived. They have a lot of ideas, a lot of big ideas. They like to share their big ideas, whether you want to hear it or not. These are the type of people who are not afraid to speak their mind. They think out loud. They problem solve out loud. And what's interesting about that, especially the problem solving out loud or the thinking out loud, we're going to talk about the cautious and reflective people. They don't do that. So cautious and reflective folks, they like to think things through. They like to have processes and procedures in place. They like to think of things all angles before they act on anything. I'm gonna not share my screen real quick, and I want to talk a little bit more about this. Because I was just in a workshop that I did and it came up. This is so common, the outspoken, active, and the reserved. When you have teams that have analytical engineering, numbers, and then you have sales and marketing. And those are the exact examples of how those two are different in their behavior styles. So very easy ways to think of things of if they're that cautious reflective. There's no such thing as let's talk real quick. Or can you give me an answer? What do you think about this on the spot? People that are cautious and reflective don't work in real quick mindsets. Also, do you remember when I said that outspoken people think out loud? Well, cautious and reflective people, when they hear things, their brain automatically goes into problem-solving mode. So that immediately causes this. Where are we going with this? Why are we addressing this? Is this serious? Do we need to change it? So very simple tool on that. If you're outspoken, problem solving out loud, and you know that your team member, your partner, your assistant is a cautious reflective, simply letting them know you're thinking out loud or you're problem solving out loud, or this does not need a problem or solution, or no attention necessary. So when you're an outspoken, big idea person, this is entrepreneurs in general, you get this itch at like 1 o'clock in the morning. You have this big idea and you have to scratch it. You have to share it. You have to put it out into the universe. So you might be the one that's sending a 1 a.m. Text message with your big idea, and your assistant, your partner, doesn't know what to do with it because it's 1 o'clock in the morning. So simply adding something on there, no attention necessary, no response necessary, just letting them know I'm getting this out there, really goes a long way. When you understand what the other person and how they process, it helps you not add stress and anxiety to that person. Does that make sense? In the Q&A, you can write in a chat or agree. You don't have to. That's where Allie and I can see if that makes sense to you. Or if you have a question that is prompted by something I say, please feel free to put that in. Allie will get my attention on that. So let's go back to the second style of differences between your groups. Naturally, we have one side of us that are questioning and skeptical type of people. These are the type of people that are analytical, that are results driven, and are really much more over facts over feelings. They don't care about your feelings. They really want to get to the end result more than they care about the journey on how to get there. They can tend to be more cynical in nature, not very trusting. You have to prove yourself before they buy in, which is the exact opposite of the other side, where you are naturally warm and empathetic and accepting. You put people first. Feelings are just as important, if not more important than facts sometimes. But these are the folks that are emotionally driven, whether they want to or not. Emotions play a big part in their daily lives. How other people feel, how they feel about others is important to them. It's the journey. This comes into problems when these sides don't understand each other. Moving forward, when you break all that down, like I said, I love the DISC theory. And so when we talk about DISC in this conflict resolution style, you see up here the green, that is our dominant personality. Those are the folks that really care about logic and victory. Next to them, we have this red category. We call those influencers. These are the really expressive, party first, figure it out. Let's just jump in. We'll read directions later. Those are our eyes that we like to call them. They're very expressive in feelings. It's not so much about logic, it's about being heard. On the outside of this big circle, you'll see the motivators. What motivates them, right? So we go back to the D style, you can see that they're motivated by control. They want to have control of the outcome, they want to have control of the situation. Where you're next door to them, right? These both are outgoing, outspoken folks. But this red, this I, they really care about being heard. Then at the bottom, those reflective, reserved folks, they're even broken down into two different categories. You have the justice, logic, those are those C's. We call them the conscientious group. They care about facts. They care about where's this going. They care about accuracy. We have our blues. Our blues are our S's. We refer to them as steady. They're the supporters, the glue that holds all the groups together. We want to protect our S's at all cost. They keep the groups together. If you're in a long-term marriage, chances are, I would bet 90% of long-term marriages has an S because they care about harmony and collaboration. So they're going to make sure the team is working on the team. But if you can see that their goal is harmony, where that runs into place is conflict avoidance. So then if you have too much of that, having a compromise every time isn't always the best way. Compromise doesn't always mean a good ending, a result. We might want to go into a win-win situation, but you have to have somebody who makes a decision. And those S's challenge that with a decision. Let's talk about it a little bit more. When you talk about with teams and the different categories, oftentimes the CEOs, the department heads, the leaders, actually, let's talk about schools, teachers, administration. This is where you can see a huge distinct behavior styles. So with schools, you tend to have the administration department tend to have a lot of dominant personality styles. Those are the ones that are results driven. They get things happening. They're the problem solvers. And then with the teachers, those are the ones that went into teaching because they love the growth of humans. They like to participate in learning styles. They are really into lifting others and educating others. So this happens a lot in this type of group dynamics where you have distinct group dynamics. So what the goals is where we're trying to deal with conflict resolution. What is the goal of a dominant behavior style? They want victory. So if I am an S style and I only want to agree, am I giving in or am I standing up? Those are the things that you have to recognize in yourself. If you're a high I and you just want to be heard, because you have this really cool idea or this really cool opinion, is it really based in facts or results? If you were ever in debate, I was in debate in high school. If you were ever in debate, the debate was never really about facts, right? I would often choose a side when, I mean, back in the 90s, I guess, we were still debating whether or not the penny should stay in circulation. Well, no matter what the debate was, I like to choose the one that I kind of didn't agree with so that I could just try to figure out if I could convince somebody else that my opinion or my methods of persuasion were better. So somebody with a high I doesn't really care about facts. So you can see somebody who is a high I who doesn't really care about facts debating somebody who is analytical, who only cares about facts, and how exhausting that could be. A C will often just, throw up their hands on, well, maybe you're right, maybe I'm wrong. And they'll just back down because they're exhausted with the facts of lack of facts, if that makes sense. So it's really important to realize where other people are coming from when it comes to conflict, because somebody that is a dominant style, they're going to overuse the need to win. And so you need to be aware that they're going to be blunt and impatient. Somebody with an I just wants to be heard, so they're going to get loud, impulsive, and passionate. Somebody that is at S, steadiness, they are going to be passive and people-pleasing. And then finally, that C style, that conscientious style, I'll pull up the app again, or the picture again, so you can see what I'm referring to. But that C, right, their biggest fear is being wrong. And they don't want to show any kind of fear of emotions. So all of these are exact opposite ways of handling things, but how can we get that to work together? I really want to put in the idea that we don't need everybody on a team to be well-rounded. I strongly believe that the leaders of teams need to be as well-rounded as possible. But when you can bring out your members of your team's strengths and what they do really well to the team, that is your best course of action than trying to mold them and change them into something they're not. For me, my back to DISC, I took this test in my 20s, and I am a very high ID. I'm that very high topic. And when I took the test in my 20s, and my results showed that I had very little to no S and very little to no C, which means I was not well-rounded in my 20s. I was very much outspoken, arguing things I couldn't back up with fact, but all I wanted to do was poke holes into your arguments, right? But when I got the results from the test and then I read all the really cool things that came along with being an S, I realized that I really wanted those traits, that those weren't traits that I was willing to not have in my life. And I wanted to work on those. For example, patience. I am not a very patient person, but if you ask my kids and you ask people close to me or my clients if I'm patient, they would describe me as patient because I work on that. Now, if you ask my husband on a phone call on the way home if I'm patient, he will tell you I'm not because he's my safe person. So I'm not naturally patient, but I do practice patience. Now, on the flip side of that, I'm not naturally analytical. I don't really see things through. I will still cut a piece of wood 4 times without measuring it and think I'll just glue it back together, right? I'm not analytical, but I also decided that that's not somewhere where I want to put my energy and efforts in. So that's up to you, and your self-awareness is where you see your strengths, acknowledge where you can have some things to work on, and decide whether or not where your energy is going to flow. And as a leader, your job is to recognize that in others. And we're going to talk about that a little bit about how recognizing others is not weaponizing it, but strengthening what they do already have going for them. So let's get into the conflict resolution. There are 4 steps that we want to address with conflict resolution. No matter where you fall in those areas, this is the key. You want to clarify the issue. What's causing the conflict? And you want to find out what's exactly going on. You don't want to assume. We all know what assuming means. Break up those words if you don't, but you want to find out exactly what the problem is. Don't feel like you can figure it out on your own, or you can see why they're acting in a certain way, or why they're behaving something, or they didn't do something. You want to find out exactly what's going on. And sometimes that's going to mean you need to address the person to find out what's going on. Read the body language. Address the team when there is not cohesive going on. We need to sit down and pinpoint what exactly that is. Then you want to identify the solution, figure out what the goal is, what will make a win-win out of both parties, and then monitor and follow up. Now, this seems like a very simple 4-step, let's fix it, right? Conflict resolution. However, we're humans. So let's talk about why we can't really just get to the monitor and follow up part so easily. Again, we're human, so we get defensive. And this is where I want you to figure out what are your top triggers? Where are the things that you fall into when you know that you're defending? Oftentimes when we are in conflict, we defend our strengths and ignore these barriers, ignore these weaknesses that other people are only noticing, right? So in conflict, they're only pointing out these defense mechanisms, these traps that we put ourselves in, and then we can't get them to see our strengths. So it's really important. Let's go over them. Are you quick to get defensive? That's one of mine. Do you dismiss onto other topics? Do you blow things off that it's not a big deal? This goes back to that golden rule. Oftentimes we think, right, if it's not a big deal to me, then it shouldn't be a big deal to them. We can't live like that. If it's a big deal to them, we need to at least address and acknowledge, not just wish it away or push it off, especially when we're in leadership roles. Jumping to conclusions. That's again assuming. We don't want to assume. Do we not listen? Are they talking, but we're just waiting to talk? We're not getting to the root problem. This also comes into play with listening and body language. So oftentimes people that are conflict avoidant will tell us in their body language something's wrong way before they'll tell us verbally what's going on. So yes, that's not a healthy way, and we can address that, and that's their self-awareness. But for us, in the resolution aspect of it, we're noticing the body language. We're noticing they're not saying what they really want to say. So are we giving them space and opportunity to come back, or are we cutting them off? Are we letting them just be done with it? And then we want to be able to empathize with others, even if it doesn't affect us. Remember that golden rule. Even if we don't see why it's a problem, we don't have to see why it's a problem, but we want to empathize and understand why it's a problem to them. And we really need to be able to stay calm, especially in leadership roles. We can get very passionate, and passionate is different than assertiveness and aggressive, right? We can be assertive, but passionate going unchecked becomes aggressive, and that's something we want to avoid. These are real life situations when we have conflict with others because motivators collide. So what motivates one person or two people is where conflicts start happening when they start running into each other. So for people that are dominant analytical, they really enjoy being able to catch mistakes, catch flaws. They like that in their job, and that's useful, and it's very important to have on a team. So what happens though is if you're catching flaws, are you catching the flaw? Or are you catching the flaw the person has made, your team member have made? This is where ego comes into problem. And this is one of the most common issues with conflict, is when we lose the ability to trust that our team is not judging us, but that they have our back. And so when we don't weaponize the fact that we're good at finding flaws, but we're not perfect, and I have your back, I caught it this time, this one number was wrong, good thing I got it, or I caught your mistake, you had the number wrong. It's a much different way of perspective. Then you have people who want a validation on their job well done. Well, if you're an analytical, results-driven leader, you kind of feel like their paycheck is their validation of a job well done. You're still getting a paycheck, therefore, you're doing a good job. This is what problems arise, is when we treat others the way that we want to be treated, right? So somebody who wants validation, we're human, we all want validation, honestly. We just like it in different ways. And so if you're not comfortable giving validation, that's something that you might want to work on. And recognizing when they do a good job consistently helps them realize when something goes wrong that you still believe in them. If you're only pointing out flaws, if you're only pointing out mistakes, that is all they hear. Therefore, you're not bringing out the best in them. You're bringing out the stress in them. We also now in hybrid workplaces, right? We have those on that I don't want to say cynical, but you have that analytical side. They like to work alone. They like to be told what to do and left alone to go do it. Well, when you're on a team and somebody on your team likes to be in collaborative mode, how does that work? How can you figure out how to collaborate and still be independent? Let's talk about that real quick. A simple tool with that. So how you can work those two things, people who like to collaborate and people who do not enjoy collaboration. How does that work together? Very simple things as letting people know what you're working on. So I'm going in this direction. These are my priorities for the week. This is where I see this going. Let me know if you have any input, or let me know if you have an opinion for me to switch. There, you can still work independently, but you still respect the fact that you're on a team. If you're that collaboration type of person where you like the input, find a happy medium on how much information you need. They don't want to be micromanaged. So where is something that is a win-win for that week of check-in and working on. So things you feel comfortable, again, you might like processes and procedures, you like to know what's expected and what people are working on. So how do you make sure that we're on the same page without stepping on other people's work uh, geniuses or working in their best ways? You have to figure that out. Both are valid ways of working. Hybrid workspaces, right? Somebody who really enjoys working alone and in their home, as opposed to somebody who really needs to collaborate. Both of those have very end goals in mind, and both of them are important. So how do we make those work? Those are things that need to not just be assumed that because you work best one way, your team all works best that way, right? And that goes into like force fun. It goes down into everything. When you understand your team's motivations and what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy and what motivates them, that's when you get the best out of them instead of assuming like everybody likes, a fun Friday get together. Not everybody does. Moving on to when behaviors collide. This is where you get into, especially with teams, where you get into emotions, whether you like it or not. This is where emotions, and this is where things take bad turns. So you have people who are high on the peopling. They really love collaborating and being around people, but they're very low on that courage. So they don't bring up when there's issues. So these are your people pleasers. These are the ones that tend to try to figure out how we can compromise instead of win-win. And that's not always a good thing when it's coming into leadership decision-making skills. Sometimes you have to be okay with upsetting other people. But then you have on the flip side, those that are very high on courage and don't mind putting people in their place and don't mind speaking their mind, but they don't ever take responsibility to the emotional effect it has on others. And when that comes into play, that's when it turns toxic and really unhealthy. And those are two extreme behaviors that are very common in the workplace, very common in families, but tend to be avoided and not addressed. And both of those things can be worked on when brought up into attention. I did have a gentleman once, I bring this up a lot. I was working with a team and they about 17 supervisors and then their supervisor. And we were talking with the basic of effective communication and trying to convey that when you realize that somebody speaks a different language than you do in communication styles, it's important for you to try to adjust the way that you're communicating with them. And he asks, why? Why do I have to change? And the truth is, you don't have to change, but your goal as a leader is to get the best out of your team. And getting the best out of your team, it's your responsibility to change and to be flexible. And that's the key. Otherwise, you become the problem and you become toxic. Timeline of trust. At the foundation of all high-functioning teams, it's because they trust each other. They're not just a bunch of people who work together. They're a bunch of team members who trust each other. Transparent communication is key. Back in the day, so any of you guys that are Gen X, parenting style, I saw this really cool TikTok of a Gen X mom asking the younger generation, what did we do right? As a parent, what did we do right? And it was duetted, or another younger lady in her 20s came on and she talked about her older Gen X parents and what they did right, that they were strict, but they were logical. I'm going to turn off my screen real quick because so the parent said that her older Gen X parent and what they did right was when they said decisions that it was logical and it made sense. When they said no, they gave the reasoning behind it. And it was really interesting to me because I'm a Gen X parent and I do that. And it was really interesting because we have a whole generation of do as I say because I said so. You didn't question authority. You never pushed back. And so this whole Gen X generation is really more into giving the why, helping in on the decision making, letting you understand that I don't have all the answers, but this is why we're making this decision. And this really works well when teams align the end goal and the vision of the company or the team. When you can have transparent communication, meaning I don't have all the answers, but this is the path we're going on, or this is the next step, it helps people engage in the longer vision. So they might not agree, but they at least trust that you have a process instead of the trust me. I know what I'm doing. Just go along. That doesn't work anymore. I don't know if it ever really worked in the past, but having transparent communication helps others see your vision and trust in the timeline. Again, we talked about don't weaponize weaknesses and failures. When somebody fails, when somebody messes up, is it something to learn from as a team? One of the best tools as a team when you have a regular wins and losses. So when you have regular team meetings, do you have the opportunity for everybody to share their wins and their losses on a consistent basis? That way, it's just part of the learning growth for the team. You want to listen actively, right? Listening actively means you're not waiting to talk. If you cannot follow up with an open-ended question on what was just spoken to you, you're not listening. You're just waiting to talk. Keep your commitments. This goes really into those people pleasers. Oftentimes, people pleasers will take more on their plate than they should, or they want to be part of everything. So they say yes to everything. Don't say yes to things you can't follow through with. If you're analytical, if you're an engineer by nature, keeping your commitments, your timeline. If you're going to get it done, don't get sucked into analysis paralysis. Meet your deadlines. Showing vulnerability is one of those things that, and when I talk about we talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence does not mean that you cry about everything or you're allowed to, but what it talks about with showing a vulnerability is that dominant behavior styles and analytical behavior styles don't show vulnerability. One of the biggest fears is rejection, failure. And so they tend to be way more reserved in their personal lives and in their professional lives. So if you naturally do not give compliments, if you're not comfortable giving validation, that's something you want to practice. That's something you want to work on in slow increments. And one of the easiest ways to give validation is by giving compliments and giving positive feedback. Again, we're not going back to you're getting paid for the job to do. It's the little wins that you give your team, letting them know that that was a great report. Thanks for getting that on time. I appreciate your efforts. Thanks for being here. Thanks for getting my back. Little validations and compliments is your easiest way into being vulnerable when you're not used to being vulnerable. Letting people know what you don't know and what you're not comfortable with helps them trust you even more in the big picture, because they're not believing that you're just giving them any answer. You're just believing in yourself too much. If you show them a little vulnerability, they're way more apt to be on your side. And here's the truth with it. There's a saying that, not everybody has to like you. And that is true to a point. But in a leadership role, being liked is important. People work better for people they like. Now, that is different than enjoying, that is different than hanging out, that is different than besties. But if you are leading a team and you want that team to be high functioning, your team needs to like you. And that can come in different forms of respect. You don't have to tell jokes, but being liked, it's proven that humans work better and enjoy people that they like. So again, vulnerability and giving compliments is one of the easiest tools to use. Conflict management. If you can remember these 4 R's when you're now in the stage of we've mastered ourselves, we've understand what our strengths are, we've understand some of our barriers. So we're going to recognize the ability to deal with conflict more effectively, more efficiently. And these are some really great little tools to remember, the 4 R's. And there's a 5th, respect, you can add to it. But you want to recognize, we talked about that too, the 4 steps. Recognize, I'm going to skip on real quick. You're going to recognize the conflict. So you want to acknowledge the existence of the conflict and being aware of the issue and the causes of what's behind it. So we're going to that root cause. You want to choose an appropriate response. That could mean waiting. That could mean dealing with it immediately. It could mean asking for other people's opinions. And then you want to find the solution. You know what's interesting about this is that I brought up this to my husband, who works in construction. And I was hired by a new client that they also are in the construction field. And so I asked him about this conflict resolution, about how to really use it instead of me just assuming I know what it's like to be on construction sites or being in the construction industry. And he was telling me about they have 2 teams that are field teams that they can't have work together because these field teams don't get along. They have cultural backgrounds and just they don't work well together. And so what was interesting about that is that to me is conflict resolution. Not everybody has to get along. Not everybody has to compromise. You as a lead, you as the business owner need to figure out what is important to you. Is these 2 teams working together going to help the greater vision, the bigger goal? Or do we have the capacity to keep them on different job sites and work well with the people they work well with? I thought that was a perfect example of you don't have to bring everybody together. You just have to recognize the solution and address a real life problem with a real life solution. And not working together and not being on the same team might be the solution for the greater good. After the fact, then you want to reflect on that whole process and that whole procedure so that it doesn't get repeated again. So again, you're going to recognize, resolve, respond, and then reflect. When you are in meetings, when you are actively engaged in team situations, if you are in a brainstorming environment or you are bringing 2 teams together that need to work things out, when you're running a meeting, when you're in charge, you need to actively focus on the others being heard. It's not about your opinions. It's about listening to what the team has to say, what the other person has to say. Realizing in conflict, people are coming with 2 things, their purpose and their concern, and have those 2 things been addressed before the meeting is over. The purpose is, what do they want? What is the goal of this meeting? Then their concern. What are the objections and the doubts of what you're presenting? So before the meeting is over, have those 2 things been addressed, the purpose and the concern of everybody in the room? Have we given ample time to everybody? Going all the way back to the 2 different personality breakdowns or behavior broken out, outspoken, those folks are going to take over dead space. If there's too much quiet, outspoken people are going to talk over and fill in the gaps, which does not allow those that are reflective to speak up. Oftentimes they're not going to compete for attention. So it's up to us to make sure that we're giving ample time. We're sitting in the silence and letting them know that they have the space and the time to respond. And then giving up the opportunity, if you need time for follow-up. Not everything is going to be okay being brought up at the table. Some need to reflect, decide, ruminate over it, and come back. So are you giving time to follow up? In relationships, there are keys to getting along with anybody. Now, getting along with anybody doesn't mean you have to enjoy everybody, but getting along with your team, the people you work with, and your family is important. And it's an important skill set to have. And so some insight to that is not moralizing preference. And what I mean by this is not changing your morals or your values, but not placing a moral on your preference. This could be used for font styles. And at first I thought, oh, that's kind of, not such a good example. But font styles are actually something that people in the business or in companies do fight over or have opinions. I don't say fight, have opinions over. And so when something is streamlined like fonts, it's important for you to not moralize your preference. And that means you're putting an emotional attachment to the decision that's being made. Again, with that, it goes into play on, I'm going to stop my screen. With what's more important, being right or the relationship or the end goal. And so many times we moralize that our opinions are better. This is really something I want to bring up to going back to the font. When you have team members that are analytical by nature, that reserved, their brain goes into the why often. Why are we doing it this way? Why is it being done this way? Which are very valid things for their brain to want to do. But if somebody who is dominant doesn't like to be questioned with the why, they get defensive instead of realizing this is just how their brain works. So 2 ways to handle this is having a standard operating procedure. This is the why we chose this font so we can stay consistent across the board. So our brand and our message is getting out to the right people in the way that we see. Hang on real quick. I never plugged in my computer. So before it crashes, there we go. So moralizing, no, so people who ask why. It's okay to need to know why, except on every little thing. If you're analytical and you like to enjoy the why, sometimes you have to understand that if it's not part of the bigger picture and it's just curiosity, you've got to be able to deal with moving on from it and accepting that it has been decided on. So relationships are more important than being right. And then you want to make sure that validation, we talked about a little bit, is a 6th language. Although for 2 different reasons, though. If you don't give validation, normally that's something that you want to practice. Practice giving validation to those around you, not just because they get a paycheck, because they're human and they like to know that you value them. But on the flip side, if you're somebody who gets a dopamine hit off of getting validation, you've got to assess that in yourself and realize that that's something you've got to do for yourself. You cannot keep chasing validation in others. And also recognize that others do recognize it in you, but they're not always going to say it. So you have to be your best advocate. Don't always think they should recognize, they should know I want this promotion. They should know I have an opinion on this. They should ask me. You have to offer it. You cannot sit back and wait for them to recognize that in you. And then finally, if you can't get along with everybody, if you can't get along with your team, you have to take ownership of that and figure out why. And it really does boil down to it's not them, it's you. What are you doing that's not helping this team get to the high functioning status that is possible? What problems are not being addressed? What solutions are not being brought to the table? And how do you play a role in that? And remember, we're all humans. At the end of the day, teams, relationships, partnerships, we all are human. We all appreciate being appreciated. We all need to be supported, valued, and seen. The difference is it goes back to the golden rule. We don't all receive or like to receive validation and support the same way. It looks different for everybody. And are you willing to find out how that looks in your team? Now, like I said, I love the DISC theory. I love taking those assessments and putting them together with teams so that you don't have to read minds and you don't have to do the guesswork. The assessments tell you how best to work with everybody. But if you don't have that ability, ask. How do you like to be appreciated? Some people, analytical people, want exact, I did a good job. You appreciate that I saved the company this. Where other people just need the good job. Just say it. Just say you like it. You need to figure out from your team how they best receive validation and support. It's very much like parenting. When you are a leader, it's very much bringing out the best in your team is like bringing out the best in your kids. Honestly, when you show that you see them and you appreciate them, they want to do more for you and the company and the end result. It gets everybody's goals aligned. And then take the opportunity to realize that in any conflict, there's a lesson to learn, and not a lesson for them to learn, a lesson for you to learn. What can you develop from it? How can you grow? So in every conflict, there's a lesson to learn, a skill to develop, and an opportunity to grow. If any of you would like to talk more about what we discussed today, please scan this code and we can talk 30-minute free consultation on anything that you would like to discuss. If that's on leadership development or if it's just on, the best places to go in Orlando for vacation, I can talk to you about that too. If there's any chats or questions before we close, thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Thanks for signing in. I really appreciate the opportunity and I love the chance to talk about this. I am a full believer in growth. I was not always really good with conflict resolution. I was just loud. And so I love talking about the changes that are possible. So thank you, Allie, so much. Thank you, the multi-funding team. And please get in touch. I'm Robin Huling on every social there is in Warner Communication.